I froze in the kitchen, my hand gripping the phone until my knuckles went white. On the other end, my daughter-in-law's voice dripped with triumph. "I just carved your car to shreds. That piece of junk suits you better than anything else." Her laughter was sharp, cruel, echoing through my empty house. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Honey," I said softly, "I sold that silver Nissan 3 months ago." A pause, then panic. "Sold it to who?" "A retired state police colonel," I replied. "The kind who never lets property damage slide." The line went dead. A few minutes later, sirens began to wail somewhere down the street. I set the phone down, calm now. "Truth is, sweetheart," I thought, "I'm done being afraid of losing anything. Now it's your turn to learn how to lose." My name is Marilyn Cooper, 62 years old, living alone in the quiet suburb of Savannah, Georgia. I've been in this 2-story wooden house for nearly 4 decades. My late husband, Frank, and I built it, board by board, painted it ourselves, and planted lavender by the porch. Since he passed 7 years ago, I've kept it exactly as he left it, his jacket still hanging by the door, his mug still on a kitchen shelf. It made the house feel alive. Until Belle came into our lives. 3 years ago, my only son Lucas brought her home on a warm afternoon that smelled of apple pie. She was radiant. Dark hair, bright eyes, confidence wrapped in charm. "Lucas says you make the best chicken pot pie in Savannah," she said, helping me set the table. For the first time in years, laughter filled the kitchen. When they married 6 months later, I paid for everything: the gown, the flowers, the venue. Frank would have wanted our boy's wedding to be perfect. Watching Lucas smile under the golden May sun, I thought I'd gained a daughter. I didn't know she'd one day call me the old tenant who hasn't moved out yet. It began with small things. "You should sell these old curtains," she'd say, glancing around my home like an appraiser. "This house is too big for you." Each time her words cut deeper, though her tone stayed sweet. Lucas changed too. Calls turned to texts. Texts turned to silence. Then came the day I returned from the market to find strangers drinking wine in my living room. "Happy birthday to my husband," Belle announced, glass raised. "And cheers to our new home." When someone asked who I was, she smiled and said, "Just the old tenant." Laughter erupted. I didn't yell. I walked to my room, closed the door, and whispered to Frank's photo, "They've forgotten who I am, but I haven't." That night, I opened a notebook and wrote, June 12th, begin the counterattack. In the weeks that followed, I played the fool, forgot the porch light, asked the same questions twice, let them think my mind was slipping. When they believed it, I saw their real faces. Belle started taking pictures of the house, of the address numbers, pretending to admire the garden. Mrs. Dolores, my neighbor, whispered to me one afternoon, "She was here yesterday while you were out, taking photos." That confirmed what I already suspected. They weren't planning to live with me. They were planning to take everything I had. Then came the call from Joanne Patel, an old friend and notary. "Marilyn," she said, "someone requested a certified copy of your deed. Name's Belle Collins." My heart dropped. I went straight to Joanne's office. The document had my signature, but it wasn't mine. Belle had forged it. Joanne frowned. "She's trying to gain legal control. You need protection." That night, I called my niece, Maya, an attorney from New York. Within hours, she was at my table, laptop open, eyes sharp as glass. "They're preparing to declare you mentally unfit," she said. "With a forged power of attorney, they could take your accounts, your house, everything. We need to move fast." We drafted a new will, shifted my savings into a protected account, and filed a legal document giving me full rights to live in the house until I die. Maya's last advice was simple. Get proof. Let them expose themselves. The next morning, my nephew Tyler arrived with the cookie tin. Inside were hidden cameras disguised as a vase, a wall outlet, and a clock. They'll back up everything to the cloud, he explained. Let them think you're helpless. They'll show who they really are. It hurt to install those cameras in my own home, but it hurt more to imagine losing the only place Frank and I built together. So I set the stage. I called Belle and offered her a spare key. In case I misplace mine, I said kindly. She smiled, too quickly. Now you can relax. When she left, I locked the door and whispered, "Oh, I'm very relaxed." Over the next weeks, I acted frail, left the stove on, forgot my purse, told stories twice. Belle began rummaging through drawers when she thought I wasn't watching. The cameras caught everything, her searching for papers, taking photos, whispering to Lucas. If we get a doctor to say she's losing memory, the power of attorney gets easier. That night, I moved all my money to the new account and signed the updated will with Joanne. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "No one takes what you've earned." 2 days later, Belle came by with a pie I was allergic to and a fake smile. "You need to watch what you eat, Mom," she said sweetly. I looked at her, calm. I take note of that every day. She didn't know the cameras were watching her every move. The following week, Lucas called. "Mom, Belle says you've been forgetful. Dr. Price can check if everything's fine. Can you come tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I agreed. Maya joined me. During the test, I answered every question perfectly. When the doctor suggested I sign a temporary financial power of attorney, Maya cut him off. "There's no medical basis for that recommendation. Please note that in your record, Belle flushed, muttering about my forgetfulness." I turned to her and asked quietly, "Do you have proof for any of that?" She had none. Outside, the sun felt like freedom. In the car, Lucas said softly, "Mom, you're seeing us wrong. You need supervision." I met his eyes in the mirror. "No, honey, I just need protection. From the people I trusted most." That night, I opened my notebook and wrote, September 17th, they tried to force a signature, failed. Time the counterattack. That was when I set the final trap, the one with the silver Nissan. I listed it online, and by evening, a retired state police colonel named Marcus Ellison called. He came at 3 p.m. sharp, examined the car, and bought it on the spot. "If anyone damages my car," he said, "I file charges immediately." I smiled. "Good. You're exactly the man I wanted it to belong to." 3 days later, I left the extra car key on the kitchen table. When Belle visited, her eyes went straight to it. "You still keep the Nissan key?" she asked lightly. "Habit," I said, "even if I barely drive it." She smiled, thin as ice. I knew what would happen next. On Saturday morning, I parked nearby and watched from my rental car. At 11:18 a.m., Belle arrived in a red sedan, cap pulled low, a metal key in her hand. She crouched by the silver Nissan and dragged it hard along a side. The sound of metal tearing paint cut through the air. I recorded everything. When she left, I called the colonel. "It's time to make good on your promise," I said. 10 minutes later, police sirens echoed down the street. The police arrived within minutes, 2 squad cars, lights flashing red and blue against the white walls of my house. I stood on the porch, calm, hands folded, watching Belle argue with the officers. "There must be a mistake," she cried, her voice cracking. "That's my car." One of the officers, a tall man with a crisp southern accent, pointed to the dashcam footage from the colonel's vehicle. "Ma'am, that's you on video vandalizing private property. You're lucky he's only pressing charges for destruction, not trespassing." Her face drained of color. Lucas ran out of the house, barefoot, half-dressed, panic in his eyes. "Belle!" "What did you do?" I stepped forward slowly, the morning sun washing over the porch. "She mistook ownership for entitlement," I said softly. "An easy mistake for people who forget whose name is on the deed." Belle glared at me, trembling. "You set me up." I met her eyes evenly. "No, dear. You set yourself up." I just let the truth do its job. The colonel standing beside the officers tipped his cap at me. "You've got good instincts, ma'am." Sharp as they come. When they drove away with Belle in the back seat, Lucas stayed behind, staring at me with something between confusion and shame. "Mom, you planned this." "Yes," I said. "And it's only the beginning." That night, I sat in my kitchen, the same one where Belle once called me a burden. Now it was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above the window. I opened my notebook again and wrote, October 3rd, the trap worked. Step 2 begins tomorrow. Step 2 was exposure. Maya had already compiled the footage, the forged documents, the medical fraud attempts, and the recorded conversations where Belle called me the old fool with the deed. We sent everything, copies neatly packaged to the local DA's office, the mortgage company, and Lucas's employer. Sometimes, Maya said, ruin doesn't need revenge. It just needs daylight. By Thursday morning, the fallout began. Lucas called me, his voice shaking. "Mom, my boss just saw the police report. Belle's being investigated for fraud. They froze our accounts." "I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart," I said quietly. "I truly am." "You wanted this," he snapped. "You enjoyed it." I took a breath. "No, I wanted truth. The enjoyment is just a side effect." There was a long silence. Then a click. He hung up. I didn't cry this time. I'd already spent too many tears on people who mistook kindness for weakness. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang. Lucas stood outside, looking older, thinner. "She's gone," he said. "They found out she had warrants from another state. She's not getting out soon." I opened the door wider. "And you?" "I didn't know what she was doing, Mom. I swear I didn't." I gestured toward the dining room table where the same vase cameras still sat, now unplugged. I used to believe people who said that, until I started recording proof. He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "Frank always wanted you to fix things with your own hands. Maybe now's your chance." He looked up, eyes rimmed red. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then quietly, "Not yet. But someday." He nodded, understanding, and left without another word. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. Somewhere down the street, a child was laughing, a sound I hadn't heard in this house in years. I picked up my notebook again. The last line I wrote glowed faintly under the lamplight. October 20th. The house is quiet again, not empty, just peaceful. I looked up at the lavender Frank and I planted decades ago, now blooming wild and free. "We did it, love," I whispered. "We kept what mattered." The air was still, the sky turning to soft indigo, and for the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. And maybe, just maybe, forgiveness waiting somewhere down the road. Would you like me to create 5 cinematic, ultra-realistic 8K prompts to visualize the most powerful scenes from this story? The call trap, the police arrival, the confrontation, the quiet ending, etc. Weeks passed in silence. The newspapers called it a domestic fraud scandal, but to me, it was just the closing of a long and painful chapter. The nights were still, the air lighter somehow. I stopped locking every door twice before bed. I began to sleep again without jolting awake to phantom noises from the hallway. One evening, as dusk spread over the yard, I sat on the porch with a cup of mint tea and saw Lucas walking up the driveway. His shoulders were slumped, but his pace was steady. When he reached the steps, he paused. "Can I come in now?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and lavender. He looked around like it was the first time he'd really seen it. No tension, no pretending. I poured him tea. "You look thinner," I said. He gave a half smile. "Therapy," he replied. And some real food wouldn't hurt either. We both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that breaks through layers of regret. After a long pause, he spoke again. "I read your letter to Dad," he said. "The one you kept in the frame. You told him you'd protect this house and yourself. You did both." His voice cracked. "I didn't protect you." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You're protecting me now, by finally protecting yourself." Over the following months, Lucas rebuilt his life one small act at a time. He took extra shifts, paid his debts, and attended counseling every Thursday at 6 p.m. sharp. He called once a week, always beginning with, "I'm still here," as though promising to never disappear again. I never asked about Belle, and he never mentioned her. Some wounds don't need reopening. They just need time and distance to scar properly. Then, one afternoon in early March, I received a knock on my door. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Dolores King, holding a basket of still warm muffins. "You know," she said, grinning, "you're famous around here. Half the women at church are asking how you pulled off that whole operation. They say you should teach a class." I laughed, but the idea stuck. A week later, 4 women sat in my living room, notebooks in hand, sharing stories of children and in-laws who took advantage of their trust. Some cried, some stayed silent, but all of them listened. By the 3rd week, there were 12 of us. We named it the Wednesday Women's Circle, a place for truth, safety, and preparation. I created a checklist we read at every meeting. Write a clear will. Understand every document you sign. Name a trusted person outside the family. And never let guilt talk you into surrendering what you've earned. Each time a woman stood up and said, "I said no today," we all clapped. It became more than a group. It became a lifeline. And in those wrinkled faces, I saw versions of myself. Women who had loved deeply and lost peace because they'd been told that silence was virtue. One afternoon, a young woman arrived, hesitant at first. "I'm Andrea Collins," she said softly, "Belle's niece." I tensed, but her eyes held no malice, only sadness. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. Inside was a shaky handwritten note. "Thank you, stranger, for giving me the courage to speak. Because of you, I reported what was taken from me." It was signed by Andrea's grandmother, a woman Belle had conned out of her savings. Tears welled in my eyes. "Would you like to join us on Wednesdays?" I asked. Andrea nodded. "I think my grandmother would want me to." That night, I called Maya to tell her. She was quiet for a long moment before saying, "Marilyn, you didn't just protect yourself. You started something bigger." And she was right. The DA's office reopened investigations based on new testimonies. A month later, Colonel Ellison called. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, "Belle's being charged in 3 separate fraud cases. It's likely she'll serve time." I sighed, feeling neither joy nor bitterness, only release. "I don't want her to suffer," I said. "I just want her to understand." He replied, "Then you've already won." The Wednesday Women's Circle kept growing. We moved from my living room to the church hall. Dolores brought cookies. Andrea printed guides. And I spoke at the podium once a month, reminding everyone that self-respect isn't pride, it's protection. One afternoon, Andrea asked me, "Do you ever wish it had never happened?" I smiled. At first, yes. But if it hadn't, none of you would be here, learning how to fight back. She nodded slowly. "They call you Steel Marilyn, you know." I laughed. "Steel rusts too, dear, but it shines brighter once cleaned." Life settled into something I hadn't felt in years, balance. Lucas came for dinner every Sunday, helping me tend the garden and repair the porch railing. He brought white tulips every time, saying, "For peace, Mom." I watched him grow, not just older, but inwardly stronger. One evening, he handed me a folded paper, Renunciation of Inheritance During the Lifetime of Mrs. Marilyn Cooper. His signature was clean, firm, final. I stared at it, speechless. "Lucas," he smiled. "I don't need anything from you, except time." That night, I wrote in my journal, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to stop bleeding where the wound has already closed." Spring arrived in Savannah like a quiet apology. The air turned softer, the pines shed their pollen, and sunlight spilled through my kitchen windows the way it used to when Frank was alive. Life had settled into a rhythm again, not the one I had before Belle entered our world, but something gentler, earned, deliberate. Each morning I brewed coffee, fed the blue jays on the porch rail, and opened the curtains to watch the neighborhood come alive. My house, once a battlefield, now breathed peace. Lucas came by every Sunday at 11 a.m. sharp. He brought coffee beans from a small roaster downtown and carried white tulips for the vase by the window. The first time he arrived with them, he said quietly, "For you, Mom. They mean forgiveness." I smiled, arranging them with careful fingers. "Then we'll keep them blooming all year." That became our new ritual. No heavy conversations, no old arguments, just waffles, music, and small steps back toward love. One evening, we sat at the dining table with half-finished plates between us. Lucas stared down, his voice trembling slightly. "I still see her face sometimes. Not because I miss her, but because I'm angry at myself for not seeing through her." I listened in silence until he looked up. "You were trying to protect me, and I made you the enemy." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You were blind, son. Not cruel. Love blinds us all at least once. What matters is that you opened your eyes before it was too late." He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I want to be better," he whispered. "Then start by being honest," I said softly. "No more pretending. Not with me, not with anyone." That night after he left, I stood on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars blink faintly through the pine branches. I thought of all the women I had met since the ordeal. The ones who had sat in my living room, clutching property deeds like lifelines. They weren't helpless. They were simply waiting for permission to reclaim their voices. And maybe that's why my pain had meaning, because it helped me give that permission to others. The Wednesday Women's Circle had grown so large we had to move permanently to the church hall. 25 women filled the space every week, from retirees to young mothers. We talked about boundaries, savings, wills, and more often than not, self-worth. Andrea became my right hand, organizing the sessions. Sometimes she stayed afterward to chat, her eyes soft but determined. "I used to think older women were fragile," she told me one afternoon as we packed up chairs. "Now I see they're just tired of carrying everyone else's weight." I smiled. "You're learning young what most of us learned too late." When news came that Belle had been sentenced to 18 months for financial fraud, Andrea was the one who told me first. She looked nervous, as if expecting celebration, but I only sighed. "I hope she learned something in there," I said. Punishment without reflection is just another form of waste. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Justice isn't vengeance. It's balance returning where chaos once lived." I closed the notebook and looked at Frank's old chair by the window. "You'd laugh at me," I whispered. "Your quiet wife turning into a neighborhood organizer." But maybe this was what he meant years ago when he said, "Our house should shelter more than us." In late spring, Lucas arrived carrying lumber. "I'm building you that trellis I promised," he said, setting the boards down by the porch. "Next year, these roses will climb higher than the roof." I stood watching him hammer in the warm light, the rhythmic sound blending with birdsong. The sight filled me with a quiet pride that felt different from before. Not pride in what I'd survived, but in what I'd chosen to rebuild. By summer, the trellis stood tall and strong, covered in pink climbing roses. The garden was alive again, and so was I. On Sunday mornings, women from our circle sometimes stopped by after church, just to sit under the porch shade and talk. Some brought grandkids, others brought stories. There was always laughter, the kind that comes from shared survival. One afternoon, Lucas looked around at the yard full of chatting voices and said softly, "You built something here, Mom. Not just a home, a community." I smiled, leaning on the porch rail. It's funny. I thought I was saving myself, but maybe I was just clearing space for everyone else to find safety too. That night, when everyone was gone and the last rays of sun slipped behind the pines, I sat at the table with a candle burning low and wrote my final entry in the old journal. Home, power, dignity, home. Because I fought to keep it and turned it into a refuge for others. Power, because I learned that strength doesn't fade with age, it deepens with wisdom. Dignity, because it's the only thing that no betrayal can steal once you decide to guard it. If you've listened this far, tell me where you're watching from. Every story shared, every comment written, reminds me that none of us face life's storms alone. If this journey touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, so together we keep the light of courage and kindness burning.